I want to talk to you about a segment on Dr. Phil that really suggests one of the big problems in the country right now. So he did a segment in which he had on Michael Eric Dyson and a bunch of other sort of social activists, particularly in the black community. And he did what he called a study. What was this study? Well, he got a bunch of people of different races and sexes and sexual orientations to line up, a bunch of young people. And then he had somebody ask them some 30 questions about privilege in their life. And then he had you take a step forward for every privilege you had and take a step back for every privilege you didn't have. So it was stuff like, if one of your parents works nights to support the family, take a step back. If you've ever been sexually harassed, take a step back. And by the end of that little exercise, some of the young people were, pretty far forward on the stage, and some of the young people were pretty far backward on the stage. And here's how some of those young people responded to learning about their privilege.
Thank you all for participating today.
I'm very aware of my white privilege, but it really showed through when I looked behind me, and most of the people in the very back were people of color.
I was in the back. I'm not ever in the back of anything that I do.
Being in the front made me feel uncomfortable. It's an awkward feeling to be up there and know that everyone behind you can look at you, right, but you can't look at them.
I landed in the very back of the crowd. I was a bit surprised. I didn't have very much growing up, but I've always thought that there were other people who had less.
I didn't know I was going to end up in the front. The way I was raised by the border in Mexico, that I would be less privileged, though it's weird to know that I am actually doing good.
I think talking about white privilege in a room full of white people is awkward, but in a room full of different ethnic groups, I think it's necessary.
Racial and social. How is any of this useful? So here's the question. Dr. Phil says, this was really interesting, and really, it was really something I'm glad we did. Well, it's not. It's actually a bad thing. The reason it's a bad thing is you can listen to what some of these young people are saying. So there's a woman who is standing in the back, and she appears to be of maybe Filipino extraction, and she says, it never occurred to me that I had it rough, right? It always occurred to me that there were people who were worse off than I was. Why is that a bad attitude? That's a really good attitude. And being awakened to the fact that you have it really rough and being thinking of yourself as a victim is a really easy path to slide into resentment and anger and rage at other people who, quote unquote, have it better. There's a young black woman there who says, I've never stood in the back in my life. That's the right attitude. The right attitude is you don't have to stand in the back just because of dint of birth or problems that you had growing up. In America, you can get ahead. But the entire privilege discussion is supposed to not awaken people to the fact that there's inequality in the United States in terms of where we start. We all know that. You have to be an idiot not to know that. But it's supposed to instead instill in people who were better off growing up that they somehow had an unfair advantage over others, and to instill in people who are worse off growing up that the people in the front screwed them, right? To even set it up in this sort of physical dichotomy where the people who are quote unquote more privileged are ahead and the people who are less privileged are behind is to suggest a sort of back of the bus mentality. Oh, you've been treated by America wrongly. Somebody has victimized you in some way. Well, virtually none of the questions that were asked in that segment were about members of the group victimizing each other. It was never, if you've been victimized by somebody in this group, take a step back. If you've victimized somebody in this group, take a step forward. None of those questions were about that. If it were about that, then we could talk about whether inequality and inequity are linked. But it wasn't about that. It was about, have you had it rougher or have you had it better? Why do you need full discussions of who's had it? There's no more boring discussion in the world than who's had it rougher or who's had it better. And I don't just mean boring in terms of not interesting. I mean that it is useless and counterproductive. Because in a country that is free, where you started is not where you end up. And reinculcating the idea that where you started is where you end up is a way of ensuring that people don't do all that they can in order to better themselves. Thinking of yourself as a victim is the first path toward irrelevance and toward destroying your own life.